Okay, we'll call the joint work session with Planning Commission, Harbor Commission, and City Council to order. A roll call, please.
Okay, for City Council, Mayor Copeland is absent. James Burton. Here. Kenneth Jones is absent. Jeff Gard. Here. Robert Beadle.
Here.
Ann Schaefer.
Here.
David Allison.
Here.
James Weiss.
Here.
For the Planning Commission, Tom McGann. Here. Nancy Bird is absent. Alan Romehill. Here. Scott Pagau. Here. John Bannon. Here. Chris Bolin is absent. Lee Holter is absent. For the Harbor Commission, Jacob Betts. Here. Mike Babick. Here. Andy Craig. Here. Max Weiss. Here. Ken Jones is absent.
Okay, Nancy Bird has just arrived. We can count her here. Our work session topic tonight is city land disposal development policies. Just a precursor to everything, James Burton is on the phone. He won't be able to hear you at all if you don't speak into your mic or the handheld mic that's going around. So if you're wanting to speak or say anything, James won't hear you if you don't use the mic. So if we could do that. Land disposal development policies, I think the crux of why we're here is recently we've had a couple of Planning Commission decisions that the Harbor Commission didn't agree with and Council was in the middle of. So I think we want to make some kind of an effort to come up with a uniform policy for land disposal. So with that, I don't know if Alan has prelude to this at all, or who wants to kick it off?
I think I'll just chime in when requested and let Planning Commission, the Harbor Commission, and council members say what they want to say.
Okay, who wants to go first? Anybody? Robert?
Sure. I'll be the first target. You know, I'm not quite sure what all this is about here. I've been pushing for a land development policy, not a land disposal. And as far as I know, P&Z has a wonderful matrix that they use to move things forward. I know there's a piece of land that was not recommended not to sell from Harbor, but my concern is land that has been sold. I mean, there's 6 properties laying around here sitting fallow. You know, they're paying property tax on raw land, not a development. So my concern is coming up with a council policy that says when you win, you've gone through the whole process, you've done the matrix, you get chosen, you get the land, okay? Come up with architectural drawings. You know, I see a lot of conceptuals and really quick drawings on paper and stuff, and it's all great. A lot of them are great ideas. There's nothing, I'm not saying about that. It's just that the developer needs to take the next steps, find out what he's gonna cost him. I've heard several times that, oh wow, really? And then, you know, if they can't do it, it can move on to the next candidate or be made available for later. And then land that just sits, not that any that have been disposed are bad ideas. I mean, they've gone through the process. We picked at council. But, you know, 5, 6 years later, there we are without a project. I mean, you can drive around and we can see land that's got stuff stored on it, hasn't been nothing. I mean, we're raising taxes and trying to raise revenue, and here we have these properties that aren't paying any property tax. And that was the whole idea of it's city property. You can't speculate. So what I would like to see for council, we tried using P&Z's matrix, but I mean, they already used it to get it that far, so just duplicating it. So what I would like to see is, just what I said, is when you get your project, you know, you don't want them to invest a bunch of money, and if they're not picked, you know, that wouldn't be fair either. So if they get picked, I want to see architectural drawings or something enough to where that they know what they're getting, where it's going to sit, what it's going to cost. And they'll get a certain amount of time to do their project. They can ask for that at the time. But I'd like to see a performance bond. I don't know how we could look at somebody's bank account. I've done that before. I've had money in the bank and told them I got it there, and see, next day I spent it on something else that I needed to do. So, and not to put undue pressure on anybody or discourage anybody, but more in a way that, look, like a banker, you've all gone to banks and bought a house or bought something. You've got to come in with a solid plan. You've got to have collateral, perhaps 150%. I mean, you know, it's got to be extensive. Their risk, but we're left wide open. So that's my idea. Is I'd like to see some architectural plans, not scribbling on a napkin or a piece of blank paper, not conceptuals. I want something that they know it's going to cost them, and then something if they don't develop it that it's going to cost them, because we're all paying for their not doing it. We're covering it with our property tax, our additional tax and stuff. Next.
Yeah, Nancy, can you use the mic, please? Yeah.
I guess is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'm gonna step back, Robert. You're talking bigger picture kind of stuff, and I'll jump in and use as an example one of the most recent land disposals that went through the process, and say that the whole sequence of events that happened for, now I will forget his name, who's just been given the property, Rob Brown's development. So when I came to the council meeting as a P&Z member to sort of watch what was going on and so on, I was frustrated because it seemed like council members weren't in sync with knowing our process, and I can understand why members of the public come to our meetings and don't understand our matrix, our maps, because they're a little confusing, even to me sometimes, I would say. You know, sort of land that's available or not available, and sort of what the whole process should be. So at that council meeting, just to get down to the nitty-gritty, it seemed like there were motions to give them the land, but without changing the land from not available to available. And then the Harbor Commission, from what I understand, talking with some folks afterwards, had expected that after our meeting, it was going to go to the Harbor Commission before it went to council. So there would have been more input at the planning meeting from harbor folks if they had known that this was going on. So, you know, it just seems like, to me, it seems like the process is a little broken just in terms of all of us knowing what the steps are supposed to be in a piece of land being on our map and being either available or not available. All of it is actually available if somebody submits a letter and goes through this process. But it's more available if it's in the green, I guess.
Thank you. Somebody else had their hand up down there? No?
Yeah, I did. Hello. I was just going to speak to Robert. He was talking about after the fact, I guess you can say performance deed. Is that right? Seems like a couple times a year we hear about a performance deed of trust being extended by council. And so this is the process that's in place to kind of get the property back if if need be, correct?
Before you go too far, it's a performance bond. It just says if you don't perform, I know what you're talking about is something else, and Sam's got a head wagon going on there. I'm saying at council level, if there's a performance bond, if they don't perform, there's no way to.
Robert is suggesting that that's something that we have. That's not currently what's in effect. Just to give everybody a brief history lesson anyway, I guess. For a period of time, a number of years, the city was selling land and putting a performance deed of trust on that to ensure that somebody does their project. And, you know, sometimes those were 5, 7 years and then get extended a couple of years. So these 5 or 6 pieces of property that Robert's talking about, all were sold under the sell with a performance deed of trust. A couple of years ago, the city went away from doing deeds of trust and went back to lease with the option to purchase. So they don't even get a chance to purchase the property until they've performed on whatever their suggestion was that they were going to do. They just get to lease it until then, and then they have the option to purchase it. So we're under a little bit different guys now that we're just leasing versus going to the deeds of trust. But I suppose council has the option anytime they want to change their minds again. But that's been the recent way we've done land sales is with a lease, with an option to purchase once they do their project.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And I see what you're saying now, Robert. I like the direction you're going with trying to hold the purchaser accountable for their promises, so to speak.
Anybody? Tony?
Well, my concern is, as the harbor master, is that our property just being sold. You know, I say it's a city property, but, you know, we do some development down there. We spend a lot of man hours trying to organize it. And then, you know, with the Rob Brown thing, I understand plan sounds really good. But, you know, I think in the 5 years I've been the harbor master, I think I've come to the planning and council to defend those lots. And, you know, you kind of get sick of trying to defend them, but it's a customer-based thing. And we're trying to give our customers a place to park their trailers and do maintenance on them and year-round storage. And it would be nice if somehow we come up with an agreement that whether we're gonna not sell these lots for, I don't know, next 10 years, or maybe council's vote is a majority, a super majority vote to sell them instead of, you know, just say 4 people or whatever. Would be nice somehow to hold on to that land and put it maybe in code under the harbor for a certain amount of time or forever, but whatever, you know, council decided on. But something to make it a little bit more secure. So if we want to invest money in it, we're not dropping money in it and then next year it's gone and we don't see any of that money back into the enterprise fund side of things.
I think ultimately what we need, from my perspective anyway, is we need to finish, redo, whatever you want to call it, our waterfront master plans, you know, get that updated and include those. I know what you're saying about the, you know, you know, any council in the future could change what this council even decides, but certainly if that could get put into code or into a master plan that was, you know, a 10-year plan, then that certainly makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, basically, it gets on. Some of this is some of the people have to put in a plan, shows the drawings of the lot, where it's going to be put, and approximately what it's going to cost them. But in this one, Harbor Commission, we never even got to see it. It was already at council, and David Ellison, he brought it up and sent it back, got it sent back to, so we can look at it. Well, I haven't seen any drawings or anything on it, or what any of your criteria that you used to take a lot. Basically, to me, it sounded like they come in one letter one day, and then that evening they had a meeting and they approved it, put it on for sale, and then sold it all in one meeting. I mean, there was no time to review anything. So that's what got me. So it just went so fast, nobody had time to even talk about it. Thank you.
Scott, you had some?
So there's lots of different issues that we have to deal with. One is, how does a lot be made available? So our land disposal maps had to go down that rabbit hole. There is no code that describes the process for how to make a lot change from unavailable to available. The only thing that I can find when I was digging around is on the city's website is a description of the process of planning and zoning making a recommendation for lots being made available. That is the only place I can find any documentation of that process. So one of the things that's broken is if making lots available or not is an issue, then we need to address it in code. Because the website obviously is not something functional, because not only, when you look at the decisions that were made regarding the lots down there, planning and zoning put forth a recommended land disposal map. City Council modified that map, adopted the modified map, and then turned around the next week or next meeting, revisited the map without ever talking to planning and zoning after making that change. And so that's why I went down the rabbit hole, and it turns out that that's because there is no regulation about what happens when those lots. So if you look at the city website, it does not require that planning and zoning meet with all the relevant departments. It does not require the city council to talk to planning and zoning if they want to change the map on any given meeting. So there's one issue that, seems to be at the heart of what we're trying to do is how do we actually deal with the land disposal map?
Before you go on, there is I can't cite the code, but there is a paragraph in one of the chapters that describes someone putting a letter in, there being 30 days notice, that kind of thing. So that exists. That's what I think everything has been based on.
Okay, just for everybody's knowledge, in case you don't know, our city attorney Holly Wells is here, and she's got her phone with the city code on it, and while we're talking here, she'll try to look and see if there's anything in there.
There's definitely a code about how to sell the lot, but what I'm saying is whether or not there's language.
Yeah, maybe I can just address that real quick. You are correct. There is nothing in code about land disposal maps. Land disposal maps are a policy that was developed in planning stemming from when 522 was put into place, which is the code you're talking about, the letter of interest. P&Z makes a recommendation to City Council decides if it's gonna sell it or put it out for proposals, which is different than direct negotiations, which is what occurred with Rob Brown's lot. There was a recommendation to refer it to Harbor Commission. It didn't happen at P&Z level. So there is that movement through. And that's in code, that's codified, that's how that rolls, every time. The land disposal maps are done on an annual basis by P&Z, and they're reviewed. In 2006, which I know is a long time ago, this process was put into place because there was a lot of public outcry and concern about land sales occurring without a public process. And this is where the public process came. Land disposal maps were developed after that because all we had was a table with a tax lot number, which means nothing to anyone but the city assessor. So that's where the land disposal, we have kept it as a policy so that every time we need to work through something or we need to change from available to not available to sold, it's not an ordinance, it's not a code change. That is the reason it's a policy, and that's why it's in place that way. Okay,
so land disposal maps are one thing that we have to deal with. second thing we have to deal with, very frustrating as a P&Z commissioner, we evaluate when there are proposals to purchase a lot. There is a matrix that we use to try to develop as some objective a criteria for evaluating each of the bids for that lot when we make our recommendation. There is no requirement that once that lot leaves planning and, or that decision leaves planning and zoning, that that's what's actually built. You know, the city needs, if we are to try to provide a fair and unbiased kind of evaluation of proposals for lots, we need to know that that's what's really going to get built. So that's another issue for land development, because it's hard to say, you know, we get great ideas, we recommend that they be disposed of to that, you know, bidder, then everything goes out the door. So I definitely encourage the city to try to figure out, if you're going to dispose of land, hold people's feet to the fire to actually build what they propose.
Well, I think currently, well, even before when it was the deed of trust, that plan was attached and the deed of trust was not met until they did whatever that plan was. Now that plan could come back and be modified by council or be turned down as it has been in the past. I'm doing now with the leases. I believe the leases also, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, Holly, those leases also include whatever that project was as their option to purchase. They don't get the option to purchase unless they've done what project they said that they were going to do through that process. Now again, that project could be brought back to council and say, well, I don't want to do this, I want to do that. Then depending on where, you know, building permits has to go through planning. But again, I understand what you're saying, that could be put into code rather than, but I think that's the way we've been doing it. Is that correct?
Yes.
You know, I'm just saying, as someone who's sat on enough of those decisions and then looked at the building that went up, that they are different than what we were making the decision on. And so if you are making the decision to change that, you know, what they build, it is not being communicated back.
That should be coming back to planning, correct.
And it is not holding, you know, it's, when we do this evaluation, we're trying to make sure that what they propose is better than the other four things. If you change it, you're not comparing it against the other four things. You're not going back to the original and going, you know what? What they are proposing to do now is not better than what, you know, bidder 2 provided originally. You know, and so that's a point of frustration for me. You know, I'm only gonna speak for myself, and Tom?
Thank you. Yeah, to follow up on that, I think that if, you know, we can't hold a given company or person to build something that they know is doomed to fail. So if they change their mind, it should come back to, the property should come back to the city, and we should initiate the process all over again, in my opinion. A couple of other things. David, you said initially, we're talking about the waterfront plan. I see that in the 2017 strategic plan, number 1 thing is comprehensive plan review. I encourage you all to do that. It would help.
You gotta talk a little louder, please.
I encourage you to do the comprehensive plan review. It would help everyone in this room, whether it's Uplands Harbor or whatever. Another frustration for P&Z is the current state of Chapter 18 zoning regulations. In our last meeting with CAM2, it really illustrated a lot of deficiencies in that code. And I see that's number 3 on your action plan. I encourage you to do that, or us as a group to do that. And then as far as the Northville Harbor stuff, I just want to go on record that I don't think that long-term boat storage is proper land development. That's just wasting our space. Thank you.
Anybody else before Robert gets another shot? Alan?
Okay, here I go again on my my philosophy. I think, you know, land disposal is pretty simple. You want to sell the land and then they pay the price and you just walk away from it. The other one is, you know, you're trying to guide development. From a philosophical standpoint, I think we all need to understand, what is it we're trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve an appropriate architectural standard? Are we trying to achieve an appropriate property tax base? Are we trying to develop for increased amenities for not only property tax, but sales tax? And until you understand all of those things, the way you feel, in my opinion, every lot, because of, all right, I'm gonna use a term that I don't mean it to be disparaging, but out of desperation, you're selling lots because you want development so bad to produce revenue that you lose sight of the overarching goal that you should have in your mind about development. If you reach that overarching goal and you say, we're trying to achieve this kind of development with this architectural standard in these particular zones, then you have, I think, a better push, let's say, to hold people's feet to the fire for that type of development. And I think those are all the things that you need to become clear with in your own minds. And I think one of those things, what we're trying to do, I think in development, what you're trying to do in any particular district is you're trying to take the guessing out of every individual lot sale and put it into a master philosophy of what you're trying to do for the Northville versus the Southville versus the harbor front here. You know, all of those things. And while a lot of this has been developed, it wouldn't hurt to revisit all that in my mind and say that these particular lots, here's what we're trying to achieve, here are the criteria. If they meet those criteria, then we're all good. There's less guessing to it. And then we have a new process in place about, you know, the lease purchase, that they've got to do these certain things. If it's going to change substantially, it needs to go back for review again and make sure that it meets the criteria that were established, or from another proposal that met the criteria. So we have to keep all those things in mind. 2 things, I've been saying them for months. Either update or do a master plan and revisit or redo the comp plan. And those are risks, those are spending money, those are things that we've talked about for months and months and months. And I think through those 2 processes, we can reach a mutual understanding of all of this that satisfies the needs of the Planning Commission, the Harbor Commission, and the City Council in terms of development and land disposal.
Robert?
Okay, Scott, you hit on one thing that's kind of, I've been pushing for, is we used to have reps from boards and commissions that gave reports at council, and there was a little snafu a while back, and we've kind of lost that continuity. So unless I go to your meeting, I don't get to really understand what's going on or what's explained. We don't get a report from P&Z, at least not consistently. So that's kind of you're absolutely right. We need somebody to a council rep that gives us a report. Available, unavailable. The harbor's trying to develop. We need to, our harbor's, unfortunately, I mean, it's full, it's a good thing, but we need to do something. We need to be planning for the future, and some of these lots around the waterfront, once they're sold, they're gone. And as we get a chance to develop, we know it's a long-term thing, that land's gone. And then we need parking, we need space above to support the harbor, and it's gone. So that's a big concern. It's not just long-term boat storage. There is a method to the madness, and we've tried to develop, but it's hard to haul fill in. We've done small things, got electricity, got water over there, got an outhouse, trying to move things away from this hazard area to make it safer for everybody, commercial, sport, charter. So there is a plan, and not knowing whether you're gonna lose access to it year to year, I don't know, month to month, you know, somebody gonna turn in a letter. So, and then with the, that's the whole idea of an architectural plan. When somebody comes in, they spend money for their plan. We need something as the final, just like a banker needs. When you're ready to do something, you come in and you present your drawing. You're committing. You've got to spend thousands of dollars, get your project started. It's not just still on a piece of paper and, you know, next year something else comes up and you can't quite do it now. So that's what I want from the council part. So with those points, thank you.
Anybody? Yeah, Andy.
Just say something on the land disposal and boat storage that Tom had talked about, Robert is speaking on it. Not so much the development that the harbor has done to the land, but the area, putting in the floating dock at considerable expense to get that, trying to relieve pressure from the boat launch over here. As the South Hill expands, there's more traffic, moving people over to that spot, advertising, trying to get people to use it. And it was being used, and I was just kind of curious, as Parks and Rec isn't here, is their land listed differently than what we think of as harbor land as we're making plans? Does Parks and Rec have different designation, or is all their land available too? Some of it just happens to be a park. Okay.
It's labeled not available, so there's available and available, and I know that's confusing, but it is red and green. But okay. It is not labeled Parks and Rec only.
It's not labeled Parks and Rec. So that would be something that I would think that at some point as a commission, when you're trying to make a long-term plan and you're trying to decide how best to serve your customers, keeping that land right now might be boat storage, but it could be some sort of larger pass-through system that could do more value-added things. I mean, there's a lot of things we could do as a harbor, but we can't do it if we don't have both in the water and upland resources to support the shipyard, all the facilities we have.
Scott?
Since I love adding to Sam's workload, you know, one of the things, you know, all of us, when we read the land availability maps, you know, people go, why is this slot not available? Why is this one available? You know, that if we did designate why we made these unavailable, so this is harbor, 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 harbor. This is Parks and Rec, Parks and Rec, Parks and Rec. This is city, you know. Then you get to find out that the cemetery is next to the high school, which was one of the first things I learned from the land availability maps. You know, it would provide that information to everyone, including planning and zoning, who we should be going through before making a recommendation for a change in the land disposal. Because at this point, there's really not that many lots out there that are left that aren't being utilized for one reason or another, you know, and so, but it would help clarify things, even though it now, instead of having available and unavailable, it would say unavailable harbor, you know, to help guide everyone's decision process. And so it's a mechanistic change that might help.
Yeah, and I think it's important when you are a, enterprise fund that, when you look at it, I mean, you're pulling in value from different things. So making your plan, really be nice to know what land is yours and what land is yours to charge money for. What land would go back to, we have, like, part of the shipyard goes to the city council, to the general fund, part of it goes to the enterprise fund. So as different things are developed, it'd be nice to know what goes back to try to get our dock prices down, improve our infrastructure.
Holly?
I can weigh in a little bit here just to give you, I think it might be helpful just regarding what other communities do in this area when they have multiple voices and multiple uses that they want to address. One thing that you see a lot of is a land allocation plan. So that's a plan that would usually go, it would be coupled with a master plan, as Ellen was talking about, but in the interim, as you build your master plan, it might be a good answer for you guys. What you would have is a work session that in essence takes the map of the available and not available, but creates a more unified selection process for that map. And then that direction is given to staff, but you have already done you sort of done the conceptualizing as a group. And so you end up with a land allocation plan that has purpose and also identifies who has the interest, where you would want planning commission, bylaw always needs to, of course, weigh in, but sometimes you may be sending something to Parks and Rec and you may be sending it to Port and Harbor. And so then you just have that transparency regarding your, who's making recommendations and who's weighing on the development.
Nancy?
So, Holly, to follow up, that would, in my mind, take from what we've got right now, perhaps the annual meeting that the Planning and Zoning Commission does to review the maps, expand that meeting to include everybody in this room and the Parks and Rec Commission, members of the public, and try to really involve more people. And I guess I like that concept. Speaking to Scott's idea of putting more workload on Sam to add more detail to all those maps, I think it would be, that could happen, but I think we need some input from everybody here to really weigh in. And the process as it is now is one that anybody who's interested in a piece of property has to call Sam or Leif and talk to them about the piece of property, and then they learn what its use is right now or why it's in the unavailable zone or whatever, and whether, what the chances are of the city changing it, kind of thing. So that's part of, I think that works at this point, but maybe more people at this point need to be weighing in on what the uses are. So I guess I'll finish by saying I really hope we can endorse the city manager's recommendation, or I take it as a recommendation that and you're putting it in the strategic plan to move these planning things up to the top and start working on them, getting them done, because there isn't in reality hardly any waterfront property left. When I look at the maps that's available for any, whether it's, there's some in each of the south and north fills, some very limited little parcels, but we're already sort of past having real master planning to do, but maybe there are some things that we can do that I'm not thinking of.
Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, so about that allocation plan, that would pretty much replace what the Harbor Commission was trying to do with, I think it was a letter of interest on those properties down there. And so they were trying to find a different way to allocate land to them, which is great. I'm trying to find ways. That would replace that, and that sounds like a great idea. And we don't have to go through that whole process, which was unprecedented. I asked Sam if that's ever happened before, and it's no, but I think that's why we had to refer it back to staff. We're actually we're down, but we were trying to think of other ways to get that process, in place, I guess, so to speak. And that allocation plan sounds like a good idea. I guess that meeting happens once in January a year. But as far as, let's see, figuring out a way to, I guess it's hard to put it in words because it is city property that is available if someone wanted to purchase it. Allocation plan sounds like a good idea to me, as far as keeping hands off for a certain period of time.
Just a point of clarification, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but part of the last time that we sent the land disposal map to city council, it changed from having one meeting a year to meeting whenever someone requests a change in that lot being made available. Is that not correct?
Well, you guys actually, okay, maybe I'm not understanding what you're asking, but
It's not one meeting a year that makes the decisions, according to what we sent to city council for them to adopt, correct?
The land disposal maps are reviewed annually by the planning commission per policy. Throughout the year, yes, the planning commission has recommended to city council that a lot be made available, and city council has made that lot available. The most recent example of that, I guess, would be the Rob Brown lot, but prior to that would be the Science Center lot.
So I take it, Scott, from your comment that in the past, when you first started on planning and zoning, maybe there was just once a year, and that's been another sort of policy shift. Is that?
Well, that was our goal.
Yep.
We adopted that as our way of doing business, but it wasn't working. We were continually getting directed to put a letter of interest into the packet because even on not available property.
Right.
So we changed that this year at our January meeting to say that's where the not available thing comes in, because it wasn't fair for some people who read the webpage that talks about what you do or don't do, or talks to us and says, you gotta wait till January to wait, and then other people are just ramrodding it through however that worked out. So that's why we changed it.
Yep.
So now.
No, I just wanted to make sure it was clear that that decision is no longer once a year. We have to review at least once a year.
Yeah. I guess reviewing the maps is reviewing the whole thing.
The whole map.
A letter of interest on a map, piece of property that's not available is reviewing one, not the whole map.
But any unavailable piece of property could be changed at any time.
Correct. That was the recommendation of P&Z to City Council, and City Council adopted.
Yep. That's what I just wanted to make sure it was clear that there was a recommendation to change from once a year to as needed, because we were not following the once a year.
James, if you, on the line there, if you have anything you want to add, just jump right in.
Okay, sounds good.
I guess if we adopted an allocation plan, that would kind of cover some of the city's assets or best interests, but still leave some of the unavailable land open for scrutiny anyway.
Alan Lanning?
Well, again, I'll go back to the master planning idea. You know, master planning is not limited to available lots. You could change your entire philosophy on the Southfield about what you wanted to see there, and over time, you know, when buildings change hands or different things, you could change that use or require that. I think there are a variety of discussions here about all the land, for example, the harbor, you know, an inventory of what service you're providing, what do you need, how many storage stalls, how much in maintenance facilities. All of those issues could be answered, I think, in a good plan. And that plan has usage issues, revenue issues, compatibility issues. You know, grocery stores next to museums, next to city facilities, next to, you know, are those uses compatible? And I think that's more than anything, one of the things that you're trying to do is uses that are compatible. And so there's a lot of things that go into a plan, and it's just not empty lots.
James?
Yeah, not so much focusing on land allocation. I was just asked a question the other week. What is the criteria for when planning and zoning makes a recommendation to dispose of land? What do you base it on when you suggest it's put out for proposal, or when you recommend we direct someone to, or when you recommend that land be sold to that person, or
I'd recommend, yeah, Tom or.
Well, as you guys know, there's 4 methods of disposing land. We make one recommendation, but it's up to you guys how you want to approach sale of a piece of property. You can either do direct negotiations, sealed bids, and 2 more that I can't remember off the top of my head. But we just make a recommendation based on what the discussion's been, and but it's up to you guys to pick one of those 4.
Criteria.
If there's more than one proposal, then we have a criteria.
But that's a different step in the process.
Yeah.
That is after the letter of interest.
It's after the letter of interest, and we're recommending that project move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got 4 choices.
Sometimes a recommendation is made based on proximity of the letter of interest. You know, if a piece of property is behind or shut off because of a property in front of it and that landowner is asking to purchase it, a recommendation to city council is typically direct negotiation, because you're creating craziness, legal craziness, by asking for proposals because there's no access. So that's one example of where direct negotiation might be a reason why.
Councilmember Gard?
Okay. We have our astute lawyer here to correct me on everything I'm
Microphone
is wrong.
Please.
Oh, I'm sorry. The Planning and Zoning Commission is a quasi-judiciary board. They have some powers of their own. They're not strictly a recommendation board, right?
Correct.
So if in this process, you know, we're talking about performance bonds or different things like that, and I know a lot of times extensions or changes come back up to the council for the council to make the final decision on what's going on after recommendations by the planning and zoning. But with them being a board that has some autonomous powers, could we let them make, since they're the ones doing this criteria, vetting for what project's gonna be the best for Cordova through this grading system that we have, if they could be the ones to say yay or nay on changes as they come along or extensions to where we get the buildings that look nothing like what was originally proposed for this. And then the backstop could be, the city council could be there for appeal if the affected parties don't like the outcome they got with P&Z. But there would be more continuity in the process if we did it that way. If we had this commission that was dealing with this project intimately coming up to it, we wouldn't be breaking it out and throwing it over someplace else and says, here, you take care of this. So I don't know if that would be something that would be feasible or not.
I can speak to that a little bit, at least on the legal front. One thing I would say is we have to be very careful. This is something that your planning department is always trying to balance. You're a entity and you want to sell something or buy something. That is not the same thing as enforcing your laws, right? There's a difference when you're acting, we want to get the most money we can get for this with the greatest promise of development. That's your right as an entity that's working on behalf of the taxpayers versus we think you created a nuisance on your property and now you have this due process right before this quasi-judicial board. That said, because of the definition of quasi-judicial, you already treat that as in order to afford your public the greatest amount of protections, you generally treat that as a quasi-judicial function. But we always want to be careful that you don't strip from the city authority and the ability to protect the interests as much as you can. So yes, you can definitely layer the approval.
But what I was saying was we've been having snafus as things go along. We'll get this big grandiose project like the stuff that got sold to St. Elias where we're going to put up all this value-added processing space, and what we ended up doing was a fish meal plant, which added its own value, but it wasn't what they had first proposed. And this stuff slides right on through, it'll come up with the council and the council say, oh, sounds good to us. I mean, we're kind of a political body with big glasses looking wide distance. The Planning and Zoning Commission has a much more narrow focused view on this, and I think we could probably get better focus on it if we left it in their hands to adjudicate changes in plans, extensions, time extensions for development, whatever it is. We so glibly nod our head to it and say yes as planning and zoning goes, Jesus, there goes everything we did out the window.
And they do have, I see what you're saying. Yes, they have the authority to be sort of the last decision maker on something. But you also have, one of the things that Alan's talking about, the development plan or the master development plan.
Yeah, no, this wasn't development plan.
But I think that they all sort of dovetail, because creating a system where the commission is the last decision maker is definitely a viable, good option. At the same time, it doesn't incorporate the voices from others who might be the best suited to weigh in on the development of a particular property, namely Parks and Rec and Works and Harbor. So that puts planning commission.
I wasn't so much talking about the initial development or decision to sell. If that still comes up, or you did change designation for a piece of property, if that comes up, that, as it works now, comes up through the system and the council makes the final decision on that. But we sell a piece of property or we do lease to buy to somebody and they say, we want to put up the Grand Budapest Hotel. And 2 years later, they come back in and say, I'm going to do a wood chip plant with this instead of the Grand Budapest Hotel. And there had been a number of people bidding on this property, and we decided that the Grand Budapest Hotel was going to be the best thing to happen for Cordova. And then it changes to a wood chip plant 2 years later, it kind of negates what they were doing. And all I'm saying is if we use them to be the body to make decisions on these changes as they go through.
Absolutely, you can absolutely do that.
Yeah.
But I think there's, you know, just to add to that, I completely agree with you, that's definitely an option. But if you're gonna go back and change what you guys do, I would recommend just exploring on both levels, both on the surface level or the initial intent to sell, and on the land allocation level, but also on the amendment of the development plan level, that there's sort of, that one of the things you're doing on the front end is identifying all of the, so it's not just planning, the planning commission making a determination on a development plan amendment. So I think your direction is great. You just sort of add a layer of review.
That's fine.
I mean, you know, I think that will get you where you want to go.
Max, go ahead. Max has been waiting for a while.
Kind of changes the subject, but on that property down there, we do have, the harbor does have a master plan they drew up. And it does have uplands in it, but it's real hard to do a plan when every year you don't know what uplands you have to work with. Part of that plan was that area down there was there's certain boat storage in there, but in the winters, when we first originally put that together, it wasn't supposed to be winter boat storage there. It was supposed to be like a snow dump area, put a snow in. And that other area across this, towards this ramp from that was supposed to be a staging area for, like, when these construction companies come in with all their equipment, they stage it there before they go somewhere else. But it's hard to do it. There's no, you know, everybody has problems, no problem. So if that stuff starts going away, these people are, where are they going to park it? You know, put it down here in the city parking lot or what? Because they have to have a place to put it. When it comes off that barge, it has to park somewhere. There has to be an area for that. If there isn't, I don't know what they're going to do with it. So that's it.
Tom, one more time.
One thing that we haven't discussed is central business district, i.e. downtown. There's a lot of work that could be done in planning that. And, you know, people say, well, we should incentivize businesses to do things. I don't know how you incentivize that, but I encourage, as the discussion goes forward, that we keep that in mind. And the waterfront is important, but we got Main Street that could use a lot of work. Thanks.
Alan, go ahead.
Just going back to James, did you get your answer, your question answered?
Yeah, I did. It seemed that the criteria was the discussion you guys have based on certain letters of interest, not that there was a set criteria as to whether or not we do a request for bids or put that out for proposal or go into direct negotiation. Yeah, I was just wondering if there's like an on paper criteria for when you see it. I was thinking about how we'll sell a piece of property and, you know, the question I received from the public was, why did we not put that property from Rob Bound up for proposal from anybody? I'm sure a lot of people could have found a lot of things to do with that lot, and I'm not criticizing your decision or your recommendation or anything like that. I was just wondering if there's criteria on paper that you would follow that maybe makes it seem like you're not being biased towards one industry or another, or yeah, I was just curious if there's a mechanism that's binding or if it's just right out of discussion.
I see. Okay, I can't really speak to that. I missed those meetings, unfortunately, but I think it was mostly, does it fall under code, you know, or zoning? Obviously, if it doesn't, we probably won't look at that letter of interest, you know, seriously. But as far as not going out for sealed bids goes, I think it was probably more, it was industry driven of that area, of what the plan was for that area. And so even we haven't received letters of interest, you know, for it besides Rob, you know, in the whole time it's been there. So I think I made it like that. So, but anywho, when a letter of interest comes in, we really look at zoning and code, and actually we aren't really supposed to look into any monetary aspect of it, from what I understand.
This is James on the phone real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, James.
Yeah, so with that one specifically, to answer Mr. Weeks' question, I'm gonna bail planning and zoning out real quick because that wasn't their doing. That was a motion that came from whoever it was on council. I don't remember if it was Jones or somebody, to dispose of it by direct negotiation. And my objection to it then was, that's not the way we've been doing things. Normally we send it back out for RFP just to see if there's any other interest in the land, if we are going to get rid of it. So that wasn't planning and zoning doing, that was council's vote.
Yeah, that's correct. Anyway, we are past our time. Appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Looks like council, in summary, needs to work on the master plan and the land allocation plan along with that, and figure out some enforcement. We get enforcement issues all over the place. So anyway, gives council something to look at with their strategic planning, and we will try to work something out to make things better. But a land allocation plan should help quite a bit. Anyway, thank you for coming. We will adjourn this meeting. We'll take a 3-minute break and then come back.